Do you think GM can keep up with the reliability of Honda and Toyota? Well, stick around, because today we are looking at the Chevy Malibu and we are going to decide if it's a buy or a bust. This Malibu sitting behind me is a 2011, so it is 13 years old and has 170,000 miles on it. When these Malibus came out, they were intended to be a worthy competitor to the Accord and the Camry, but let's see how it's held up after all these years and miles. We're going to go over the good, the bad, the ugly on this Malibu. As we start our tour around the outside, I noticed that the paint is still shining really nicely, and this is not a garage-kept car. I personally always have enjoyed the styling on these. I thought Chevy did a really good job. I think it's one of the best looking cars in the segment, and I think they still look fairly up to date even today. Now, as we go down the side, the biggest thing that we want to look for is rust, and there is rust starting on the rocker panel and lower door, wheel well sort of area down there. This car is from the Northeast, and it is starting to show. Now, I would get underneath and check it out more in depth if I was going to purchase this car for sure. Other than the rust, there's really not a whole lot to note on the outside. I do see the plastic covers that they put over the wheels on these guys do sort of wear out over time, and they are replaceable, so that's kind of nice. But with a fresh set of those, the wheels would look a whole lot better. Overall, for being in the rust belt, I think the outside of this has worn pretty well. Not a lot of oxidation on the headlights like so many cars, and still in pretty good shape after all the time. Under the hood, we got the Ecotec 2.4 liter 4-cylinder, which GM has used for a long time. This engine is running good, quiet, no oil leaks, nothing really to speak of on this particular car. These engines make an unimpressive 169 horsepower and 160 pound-feet of torque. Not terrible numbers, but also not great. I always like to make a general ruling on an engine, whether or not I find it reliable or not. This one is somewhere in the middle. I don't find them particularly reliable or terrible. There's a lot of these cars out there with a ton of miles on. The biggest thing really is oil maintenance, because the timing chains on them do require good, clean, and consistent oil flow to last a long time. And if that's been neglected, you're going to have some timing issues. And timing issues are very expensive and generally catastrophic to the engine if the timing were to jump. So definitely something you want to keep up after, change that oil on time, look after your oil levels. The main issue with these engines that you're going to run across, and this one is included because I can look at the coolant tank right now and see that it's a little low, is coolant leaks. The number one place is the intake. The gaskets go bad and then it starts to burn coolant, or it starts to just leak it out. The water pump also tends to leak coolant, as well as like the cap goes bad for the expansion tank here. Somewhere between, the engine and the heater core can leak. It's really just a bunch of coolant leak problems. It's probably something you're going to run across because it's so common. Now, as long as the engine hasn't been overheated, I'm not terribly concerned about those things, but it really could cause a major issue if you don't watch your temperature. And the number one sign usually is in the winter. You won't have heat because there's no coolant flowing through the heater core to give you heat inside the car. So that's a good sign that you're low on coolant. One thing I'd add on as maintenance, or maybe it's a problem, is fuel injectors. Not a huge deal. They're not that expensive, but I would throw probably a new set on. They help these engines run smoother. They do age and go bad and could cause a check engine light or a little bit of rough running, something like that. So I would probably put a new set on if I had one at 150, 170,000 miles. As we move on, we're going to talk about the transmission. The transmission in these is okay. It's not terribly unreliable or anything like that. I just don't like the way these shift, and most people don't. It's a common complaint. They're a little clunky. Not my favorite transmission. Does not create like a spirited driving experience. We'll talk about that more on the test drive. But the transmissions are they're just not great, even though they may not break down. As we open the door to look at interior wear, one of the first things I actually want to focus on is the door panels. I do notice on these, and the passenger side is actually worse, but the door panels do tend to sort of come loose up along here over time. The rest of the interior actually has worn fairly well, I would say, but not great. The driver's seat shows some definite wear. These are the ones with the vinyl on the sides and the suede in the center. This was sort of a mid-grade option as far as tier level. Not my favorite thing. The suede, as is common with any car where the suede is a light color, tends to stain really badly, and these are no different. The vinyl did not hold up the best. Now, I will say I actually like the styling of these interiors. I thought they were better than the Camry and Accord when these first came out. Now, this is late generation, so like the Accord had been restyled and the Camry had too. So by 2011 and 2012, which was its last year, I did think it looked a little dated, a little bit cheap in a few spots with the plastic and things like that, but it's actually not broken as far as the dash or like the doors and things in your center console. It all actually feels pretty good. It's soft to the touch. It's not hard. A lot of it is not hard plastic. But we do need to talk about what is probably the biggest problem with the Malibu, and that is the electronic power steering. Inside the steering column here, there is sensors and a control module and things, and those have a tendency to go bad. Now, you can replace them individually. GM usually just replaced the steering column. But this was kind of a problem because it would make your steering very, very hard, kind of like you had no power steering. And it was intermittent at times too, so you didn't know when it was going to misread the information of how much you're turning and things like that. And it actually is a kind of a big problem. So if I was looking to use one of these, that would be one of the top things I would check out. I would take it on a long test drive to see if anything happened inside the steering column that feels like that problem hasn't been resolved yet, because it is so common. As far as other electronics, the windows, locks, all of those things work pretty good inside here. There's no issues. One thing that is common is the blower motor, which just means your fan speeds for your AC and your heat. Sometimes those resistors will go bad and you'll only work on like one fan speed, or 3 of the 4 or whatever. Those are not expensive. They're not a big deal. I wouldn't worry about that at all, even if it's doing it on one you're looking at. One thing that I do want to note is a lot of people think these seats are uncomfortable. I find them run of the mill. I don't think they're great, and I don't think they're terrible. But a lot of people did find these seats in these cars to be on the uncomfortable side. So I would definitely go sit in one if you plan on doing any long road trips or anything like that. Some people felt like they hurt their backs and things like that. But for me, it's okay, but not great. Here in the back seat, my legroom is excellent. Lots of legroom. They did a cutout actually on the seat in front. So if you were tall or had really long legs, I think you would be very comfortable as far as legroom. Unfortunately, they did not extend that to headroom, in which case I'm 5'8", and my head is almost touching the ceiling. The actual seat comfort itself is not good. It's really not. The back is uncomfortable. It's very stiff. The bottom is pretty stiff. It's just not a great back seat. Your room is decent, but I wouldn't want to sit in it for a super long amount of time. Now, one thing I do love is, one, you got your cup holders right here with some really cheap plastic holding that guy in, but that's not the point. There is a 110 house style outlet in your center console. I'm not aware of any of the other cars from this generation that had that like right here, easily accessible, that you could just plug something in, but that was an incredible idea. Almost makes up for the uncomfortable seat, but really not quite. But that was something that I love that Chevy did. Out on the road test in the 2011 Chevy Malibu. Now, interestingly, I actually kind of grew up around these cars, so I have a little bit of experience with them and some of the common issues that we talked about today. First things first, we're gonna do a little pull. These do a 0 to 60 in like 9.1 seconds, so I expect to be very unimpressed. I'll tell you, when you actually put your foot down to the floor, it has more power than it feels like maybe it should. That was okay. But I would say on like a normal driving experience, just driving up and down the road, or like trying to merge without burying your foot into the floor, it feels really slow. Could be just the gearing a little bit there. The transmission shifted good through the gears. All of that stuff. I did notice on a little downshift that it did. It was a little clunky, as we've mentioned with these transmissions is common. Now, the New York Times said when this car came out, it was reviewed very well by them, and they said it was like a super Accord, but from GM. And I'm not sure I'm willing to go quite that far. And the problem really is that the Accord that they were using as their benchmark was at the end of its life cycle. It was being redesigned for 2008, I believe. Could be wrong on my numbers there. And this car came out in 2008. And so I do think it's probably comparable to the previous generation of Accord, but not the 2008 and up. I think those ones were more refined. So that's kind of where the problem comes in for me. But the overall driving experience is kind of that boring driving experience. It's as long as your steering column is not going bad. Your steering is decently nice. The power, as long as you get used to kind of having to put your foot further down, is okay. Fuel mileage is actually like 33 on the highway, which is pretty respectable for a mid-size car, so I got no issues there. There really is a lot to love, and I think in a lot of ways these are better looking and a better styled car than those cars, but obviously that's subjective for, you know, everyone's preference there. My overall feelings on the driving experience is it's just kind of a car. It's kind of like what I always say with Toyotas, they're boring. I don't really think much about driving this car. It's not like, it's not some great thing where I'm like, oh man, it's got great power, it handles great. No, it's just a car. It's just a car. And I don't hate that for a mid-sized car at all. It's not intended to be a sports car. While things could be better, there's definitely worse options out there as far as how they drive. One thing I do notice as we are on our back bumpy roads here is strut noise. There's a little bit of strut noise. Struts are pretty common at higher mileage to be replaced across everybody, maybe a little bit more common on the Malibus, as well as like ball joints, things like that. The one other thing that I didn't mention, but is kind of steering and steering column related, is the actual steering shaft. The intermediate one will clunk. Now, a lot of those got repaired early on. It was like a faulty part that GM had, and I think a lot of them have been swapped out. I don't notice it on this car at all, but that was a common problem back in the day, from almost new. Like you'd have 20 or 30,000 miles and your steering would start to clunk because of these steering shafts that would go bad. Back from the test drive, and now we got to decide if this is a buy or if it's a bust. There's a lot that I actually like about the Malibu. I think when they are well cared for and kept up with, they are very close to being as reliable as some of the other auto manufacturers. What really comes into play for me is if it was maintained or if it wasn't. And it's tough to say that with a used car that you're going to be looking for, especially at 150,000 miles. It could have had 3 owners and never had the oil changed by one of them. While I don't think these are quite as reliable or held up quite as well as Honda and Toyota did, I am still overall pretty impressed with these cars, and I think they're a good option because the price on these is around $3,000 or $4,000, and you can get a pretty nice one for that cost. With the exception of having to do an engine replacement because of a timing issue, the maintenance on these is cheap. And honestly, some cars out there, you have to do a timing belt every 100,000 miles, and these engines will definitely last over that amount of time, and that's an expensive repair, just as like an engine replacement on this. With that being said, we are going to make the Chevy Malibu a buy. Now, this is a thin line because I do think there might be better options out there, but I overall think this is a solid option. I like the price. I like the cost of maintenance on it. As long as it's been well maintained, I think you're going to get a lot of good use out of these cars. I would also love to hear if you have a Malibu or have experience with one. I'd love to hear what problems you had, if you think it's a buy or a bust. Just let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.
Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah. Please tell me all the bad, never good, fill my head full of every single doubt, yeah. Please say any negative thoughts, I pop off when I hear people say I cannot. I get off to the thought of proving everyone wrong, I won't stop to the top, so